engineering. For as much as 24 years, he's been associated with product development and also working closely with DRDO. But he has been all these years with Larsen & Toubro on their defense side. And he's an alumnus of the IIT Bombay. May I request Mr. Barton to give his views.
Thank you, sir. I am going to be putting forward some of the anomalies specific to the defense procurement procedure, and starting with something to do with little more of the evolution phase of what we see DPP where it is today. Although a procurement procedure in a way existed, I want to take on from the point where the basic structural changes started happening post opening up of the sector in 2001. It's 11 years now, and obviously there's been a certain definitive change, but the change has not been anything which private sector wants to see in terms of how the growth really should be looking like. Licensing did happen as a part of the opening. FDI was announced right on day one. We need to be really questioning whether that has been proven to be efficacy. I mean, the efficacy of that FDI, there are hardly any FDI which has genuinely come in. I don't think even less than probably 5 million genuinely has been FDI in the form of the joint ventures in this country. Offsets were mandated, originally supposed to be direct. I do not believe even 5% of this 30% is today direct. Bulk of it is all indirect. We have heard arguments of higher costs on offsets, and the cost does go up, and the dilution obviously means a cross subsidization somewhere else. Creation of new procurement categories did come up somewhere down the line, and make and buy and make happened. Both of them, as of today, not even one program completely through. And obviously, industries today being heard before every categorization decision making taking place, although whatever happens thereafter that hearing is an opaque box. Defense procurement policy related change did come up in 2011. Something expected, the offset policy came in 2012. But issue essentially on the policy front is, so if industry was expected to be reversing, as what Mr. Gupta said in the morning, helping towards that reversal of the import trend, the first tenets of it are not yet in place. Let me just, in 2 slides, try to sum up what is exactly the DPP 11 and the offset policy 12. The next DPP, of course, every one of us is hearing is ready but not yet sort of announced. The direct defense offset norms today include civil aviation, it includes homeland security, and also includes related capacity building, and they are all available for discharge of obligation. The fact that offsets come at a higher cost, is that not a cross subsidization? One thing makes it indirect, second thing, it is now getting on, at least to an extent it does get into manufacturing, there is at least something in terms of long-term capability building, but if it is not in manufacturing, does it genuinely help anyone? Training and transfer of technology, issue debated for 5-6 years, finally now about to be getting into the policy, announced that it would be allowed. What will be allowed, what will not be allowed, still a question mark. Costing of TOT, always an issue. There are models and examples of how and where, and obviously one would have expected that when you actually start allowing TOT, that bigger 30% direct offset would now further see a gross dilution and it would probably mean nothing else would be left for manufacturing. Everything will come in the form of transfer of technology. Investment in kind now is going to be allowed. What it would actually mean is, although on the one side it is addressing issues like civil infrastructure becoming offset, which happened some years back, but today the policy very clearly is trying to say that TOT will mean X, Y, Z. It will not mean things like civil construction. But at the same time, what it would as well mean is, theoretically speaking, it would not bring in an FDI. Comes in time, in kind would not mean an FDI, which is an issue for the nation anyway. Maintenance TOT, one positive movement. Yes, now not something which is only reserved for the PSUs, private sector will be allowed. We heard of multipliers. One also expected, as a part of multiplier, there should have been a dramatic increase in the offset percentages. It does not make sense to have any multiplier brought in without that 30% magic figure being dramatically going up. Worldwide, offsets are in any case anywhere between 70 to 200%. Why is it that we are shy when we want to bring in multipliers, that we don't even want to increase the basic number which is required to be met? Obviously, the multipliers are listed in the document which came out. Offset fulfillment need not be coterminous, essentially giving out some amount of freedom. Banking period increase, again some amount of freedom. Penalty not being more than 20%, again a cap. So obviously 20% of that 30% now is just a 6% additional cost, and people will build it in and not actually fulfill the offsets. I mean, we are giving out more and more leeways of how not to do things and how somebody actually can misutilize this kind of thing, because wherever there is no penalty or a very low penalty, one can always jump in. A traffic signal being jumped in, all of us know what to do with it. And if it's something going to be that cheap, I might as well jump a traffic signal every time. We see it every day happening. Offset trading not allowed, which has been all along. In entire defense procurement was never allowed. That stays, and thank God for that, that stays that way. Otherwise one would keep on seeing all kind of fly-by-night operators doing that kind of a thing. Tier 1 sub-vendors now can discharge. Obviously the OEMs alone, being system integrators, won't do that. That's again one moment of, I would say, movement forward. The big issue to my mind is the new offset policy completely ignored that there is something called as taxation of offsets. If I produce something in the same Larsen & Toubro's factory outside the country, I can sell it far cheaper than making it in this country and selling it right here. And the cost differentials, believe me, can be as high as 35%. Now, it's something which needs to be brought into a policy perspective, that when something is getting done here, there's a taxation cost. Our primary aim in offsets was to get in technology. Technology does not come in for components. It comes in at system integration levels. Towards system integration, today, the entire 35 or 38% taxation would get slapped. And that's something which is a non-starter for having any long-term dreams of getting any system integration within the country. And the policy completely is silent about it, and it just does not address. To my mind, some major issues going forward in terms of what possibly needs to be done. FDI cap remains at 26. No foreign OEM would give in genuine technologies at 26. That's one statement of truth which we keep hearing. On the second side, we have also seen that all global economies have tightened post 2000, 2005. We have seen they have actually tightened FDI regimes. They have brought them below 26 in some cases. So this is clearly a balance to be struck, and that's exactly where what my earlier speaker, Mr. Singh, just talked about. It's a bigger picture one is talking of. Whether we genuinely want FDI or we need to use our procurement processes to get that technology in some other form, need not be then talking about something like as mundane as offsets to get technology. Or for that matter, joint ventures in the form of getting a technology. Today, one can just go around in the bigger towns, the rather metros, bigger metros, there are enough number of 100% owned foreign companies which do that technology here. It gets exported over the wire. We don't even know it happens here. There is no export control. There is no export law. There is no export policy. There is no defense export policy that exists in India. So with this kind of a major gap in what we actually do and what we keep on bringing out in the form of a document, there is no holistic approach towards this. Critical technologies are brought in the country. That's an argument for 49 Center of Excellences are created. If that happens, maybe it can go up and with an export commitment. But something, as I said, needs to be balanced out. System integration I talked about. Towards that, there's only one solution, which the Kelkar committee very clearly came out after enormous amount of debate, and that's something which was called RUR. If we genuinely want a long-term view and a long-term perspective, it cannot happen without government wanting to invest. Private sector will be a stakeholder. He would put in some money, but that some money, obviously a much larger money is going to be coming from the government, and that's exactly what RUR would have actually brought in. Unfortunately, there is something which has just not moved. Make and buy and make Indian, promote more and more programs. Really speaking, what one should be seeing is ban or just not allow, unless an absolute exception is made, do not allow any buy global. Wonder what the procurement process can do to the technology flow within the country. And that's a point which I would want to leave. Transparency of evaluation. We now are just now getting into buy and make programs. In both these kind of things, to my mind, there's a basic issue of transparency. We do not share the evaluation metrics. What we share for any user trial, for a buy global or any other process, there is no metric sharing. It has been done in one program, it has not been done in the other program. Now it leaves out enormous room for doing whatever people are best at. Dual use products, a matter of issue which DPP genuinely needs to be addressing, because while one would like to allow offset credits for dual use, every major nation in the world actually bans and controls and licenses the dual use technologies. Obviously something which is going for defense use or possible defense use needs to be controlled, needs to be monitored. And that's something which is missing. The policy is completely silent on it. You do it, you can sell. If you want offset credit, then you need to have a license. But beyond that, nothing. I mean, otherwise it can freely get exported if you are not looking for an offset. It is recommended to put in place an institutional mechanism for controlling and managing. Corporate bonds. Indian companies today cannot give a corporate bond. It's only a bank guarantee. Today the high cost agents of interest in India means very sizable additional costs. And then we are told you must compete with this taxation regime and with this high cost of capital with everybody in the world, and you should still win because you are supposed to be a cheap cost destination. That cheaper cost has what kind of other tax attached does not come into the policy perspective at all. The recommendation obviously is wherever licensed Indian industry is in position to have a specific work share, why not allow them to lead programs even if it doesn't have an RFP? I mean, we today talk of transparency to an extent of pre-clearing and pre-evaluating organizations to theoretically make them into an RUR. If that's a kind of a situation which is open for any kind of a scrutiny, including acquisition by the government by act of parliament, if that's the scene we are really talking about, what is the fear? That he is going to be acting as an agent? We need to be really talking of something which is far more moving forward if we genuinely mean that 70% process to be reversed. Foreign exchange rate variation today are absolutely kind of volatile forex markets. It does not make sense that while in a way you allow one segment something being given, the other segment is not being given within the same industry. The point here is all nominated purchases have an FERV. You compete, you don't have FERV. Now if I have my 90% of the order book nominated, my risk perception is 10% as compared to a private sector who may be competing for 100% of its business. And that completely skews the picture. And that's something which does not make sense. It's not by act of a private company that he needs to carry that risk. And ultimately, who pays for a risk? The procurement cost does go up when you talk of any risk being passed on. Time proves that any higher risk, and there's always a higher gain attached to that. If that risk is not met with, there's going to be higher gain to the company. Obviously, it means a higher cost to the government. People miss out some of those issues. Terms of payment, I need not even speak about. The DPP terms are known, but to the PSUs, those terms are 5 times superior. And it just does not make sense to me. When for the 10% of your order book you compete with the private sector, you will accept those payment terms, but for the 90%, I make your books to be completely impervious to that risk of financing or the financing cost, especially when we are among the highest cost regime. I mean the funding related issues. L1 evaluation, we know that in buy global scenario, a private company when it competes, the taxes duties at the terminal sale point are taken out. In most of the cases for large systems, the excise duty exemptions are granted. What it means is all input costs now get built in as cost to the private sector or for the public sector undertaking for those programs. While we compete with a global vendor who brings in everything completely zero cost, because no country exports taxes in the first place. Second is when we import in India, we don't slap any tax on it. So while on one segment you have somebody who sells with zero taxes all through the value chain, on second side we have input costs which now become, imagine a system integrator who buys 70-80%. 70-80% of his value chain has input taxes, only the terminal tax is taken away, input taxes become a part of the cost. And that completely sort of changes the situation in a competitive scene. One suggestion is do away with that. Allow us to declare it upfront and take it out of the evaluation, or slap all taxes on everybody's sale. Through the value chain, put it on my bids, put it on a PSU's bid, put it on the bid of a foreigner. Whatever is the tax which is today applicable, and that would be a fair competition, because all taxations at customs and the varieties of import related duties essentially are balancing out between these precise issues we are talking about. The last slide I want to, rather I kept it to the last, issue of nomination. We talk of situations that there is a process involved in India wherein the Defence Ministry decides, or rather the Ministry of Defence Production, actually Department of Defence Production decides to whom RFP would be granted. Now who sits in judgment of now who should be granted that RFP? My learned colleague earlier, the speaker, very clearly spoke about who judges the judges. Now the expectation is you have an idling capacity. You have a full-fledged what it takes. If I have 99.9, you are not cleared. That 0.1 or 0.01 may be required 3 years hence and can be created in a matter of months. But private sector does not believe in creating an idling of asset. Second issue, any change in technology which private sector would have gone on to, today would not become a part of the evaluation, because what is expected is, because a competing PSU has a certain level of technology, do you have that old technology, will you do it exactly by that way? And if your answer is you will do it differently, then you get into a question mark scenario. And that to my mind is a crazy situation. World moves on moving on higher and higher levels of technology, and each of these conditions and situations are used to actually decide it cannot be given to anybody else. As a result, it now gets into nomination. So nomination, although enough public speeches have happened from the ministry as well as from the minister that it shall be stopped forthwith last January. It continues, program after program gets nominated. The third big bogey for nomination is a matter of security. It's so secure. It is so sort of holy that it cannot be shared with anybody but a PSU. And a best example which Admiral Puri just mentioned to me, if Larsen & Toubro can build a nuclear submarine, why it can't build other submarines? I mean, are they more secret? Are they more advanced? Are they far larger? They are 1/4 of the size we are talking about. So situations like those actually get used because the issue which was very clearly talked about, who judges the judges? Where is an accountability? The procedure and a process which we are really talking of lacks it, and that's exactly where we land up with nomination. I would like to stop with that slide, just with few more suggestions on streamlining of the offset. Now that we are going to have this indirect offset, should it be on the basis of sale? Should it be on the basis of receipt of money? And that's exactly on the slide, 3 or 4 points which actually links it to direct inflow of foreign money. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kohli. Mr. Patil, sorry for interrupting your very valuable speech because we wanted to leave time for floor discussion. May I now request Dr. Vivek Lal. He is the President and CEO at Reliance Industries in the Chairman's office, primarily to spearhead growth in new ventures. His vast knowledge and experience as a global business leader are enabling global partnerships that bring critical key technologies to India. Earlier, he was Vice President and Country Head of Boeing Defense, Space and Security since May 2007. He has also been Managing Director of Boeing Commercial Airplanes in India. He also served as the founding co-chair of the US-India Aviation Cooperation Program launched by Norman Mineta in 2005. He spent a number of years in the aviation industry. May I request Dr. Lal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to commend ORF and SPs for getting such a large August gathering together, despite several meetings and conferences throughout the year. The turnout this morning again suggests this is indeed a very strategic sector, and the amount of interest from various stakeholders, whether they're private industry, public industry, the government itself, or the foreign industry is still alive and well, and today's seminar is a testament to that. And it is quite obvious, if you roll out the world map, that India represents an increasing defense budget and therefore an increasing spend and increasing aspirations for indigenization. And so the confluence of all these factors result in a high level of interest in terms of what can be done from a policy standpoint, and then what can be done from an implementation standpoint for all the stakeholders involved. Mr. Patil just went through the DPP in great detail, and I'd just like to make some general comments. If you look at procurement procedures globally, I think it gives you a different perspective on where DPP stands and how it's been evolving. The basic document and its evolution, I think the Ministry of Defense and the Government of India must be highly commended for putting together a framework. And when you compare that to other countries and what other procedures are being used, it becomes more and more apparent in terms of how much thought and foresight has gone into this, and it is an evolution. Now the DPP has aspects of both procurement as well as industrialization, and so therein are some of the topics that will be discussed later today, but therein lies sometimes the pros and cons of doing various policy recipes, and it could be argued either way on many of the issues. Fundamentally, the terms and conditions in the DPP, from an industry perspective, is an exercise of risk management. What a bidder quotes for his or her bid will depend much risk is perceived in the terms and conditions of the DPP. And so different entities, different stakeholders come to different judgment calls on that. From an Indian industry perspective, again, there are different levels of risk management that have to be looked at in terms of some of the things that Mr. Patil elaborated. The other mention I'd like to make is on TOT, the transfer of technology. I think as a nation, as we are moving forward and with the aspirations and goals that everyone agrees upon, it is not a one-time technology transfer that is being sought. It is really tools for innovation. It is not that if we get X widget or X ability to produce a widget, will that be something glorious? But it's the ability to innovate and create new products and services, which is the goal. And therein, the tools that we need to equip, or the building blocks that we need to equip ourselves as an industry, whether public or private, are critical. And I'll submit the tools have to be at every stage of the process, whether it's the conceptualization of a product, the preliminary design of the product, the design, the final design of the product, the manufacture of the prototype, the productionization of the prototype, or the after-sales support. And it's not till we look at all this holistically and not individually or partially do we start to understand what needs to be done to get us on that road of indigenization. Offset certainly is a catalyst, and across the globe you see the offset programs being a catalyst for this end goal. However, the really successful offset programs around the world are those that have been discontinued because it has met its objective of spawning an industry, and at that point the industry continues not because the industry has been mandated through certain policy to receive something, but rather they are the best and most competitive industry for the items that they're working on. There is a cost to offsets. We all know that. It does not come for free, and therefore it is very important what the offset program needs to actually achieve from a national perspective in terms of the national industrial policy objectives, or indeed, for example, what the aerospace policy of the country should be. The opportunities, I believe, in the private industry are phenomenal. As we look at different points in the value chain, and I'm familiar with aerospace, so I'll talk about aerospace, the margins and the profitability from a business standpoint, depending on where you are in the aerospace chain, whether you're at the raw material sourcing stage, whether you are at the special processing stage, whether you are in the castings and forgings business, the margins are all different. And to be able to plot that out and determine where in the value chain your particular industry wants to be, or your particular company wants to be, will again depend on investments. Aerospace, for example, is a very highly capital intensive proposition. And so where exactly do you want to be in that value chain, and what margins you're looking at need to be carefully thought through. I do believe the SMEs are probably the most important piece of setting up an industry in any country, and that has proven itself over and over again. Though they are indeed the building blocks of what you can then lead up to in terms of system integration. You will have nothing to integrate if you do not have these SMEs in place. And so that is a key point. Finally, I'd like to touch on an issue which rarely gets discussed in these type of fora, and that, but I was very happy to hear Mr. Ravindra Pal Singh bring it up, which is the people aspects. To set up a very complex value chain in India, whether in the private sector or the public sector, requires very specialized, trained people that have been educated in that field, that understand that field, that have been trained in that field, and the whole dimension cannot be treated as an ancillary to something that's already being done. So the pipeline of talent to truly understand what it means to, let us say, set up a special processing facility, or what it means to get into raw material sourcing for some of the products. That pipeline of talent has yet to be developed, and it will need the education of an entire generation before one aspires to completely design and build and manufacture various products that are being thought of. The Me Too syndrome, as I call it, is there's this great offset potential, and I too want to get a piece of it, but I'm doing something totally different currently. Doesn't work. It is something that has to be harnessed and nurtured and developed over many years, and there are no shortcuts. If you look around the world, the programs that have been put in place, they take multiple decades before you get to the point where you can truly design a product and test it and so forth, and even then get it wrong. And so some of those building blocks I hope will come out of the discussions today and in future conferences as well. But it is those building blocks that we need to, in my opinion, focus on to get to the end state.